policy. North Korea summit coming up next week.
Yep.
President going to Singapore. What do you make of these talks? Are you nervous about Donald Trump in a room with Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, actually, look, North Korea is an isolated authoritarian regime which is incredibly cruel, which has allowed its children to starve to death in order to put money into the nuclear weapons program. They have nuclear weapons. Their missile system has significantly advanced, and we should be very fearful of them. This is an issue that should concern not only Asia and our allies in South Korea and Japan, China, but the whole world. If Trump is able to negotiate the cessation of nuclear weapons and the denuclearization of North Korea, that will be a major step forward for the world, and he would deserve credit for that. And I hope that that is the success. What we don't want to see is Trump come back and then boasting about this, that, and the other thing without having accomplished anything significant. But certainly, I think the whole world hopes that these negotiations are successful and that a very dangerous regime can be left without nuclear weapons.
On Israel, you were one of the few people in Washington, the leaders, to speak out about Israel and its treatment of the Gazans during the protests on the day that the U.S. Embassy was moved. Why hasn't there been more pushback from Washington in either party on that issue?
Well, it gets back to the issue we talked about a few minutes ago, and that is, I think, money in politics. Look, here is the reality. I am Jewish. I lived in Israel when I was a young man for a while. I think I have a cousin who's living in Israel. I absolutely believe in the need for Israel to be independent, to be free, to be secure from terrorist attacks. I believe that very, very strongly. But I also believe that when you have almost 2 million people living in Gaza, where the water is filthy, where youth unemployment is at 60%, where people can't even leave the area, that is unacceptable. I also believe that Netanyahu has torpedoed the goal of a two-state solution by building more and more settlements. And I think what the proper role of the United States of America would be, which supplies a whole lot of weapons to people all over that area, not just Israel, but to Saudi Arabia, another despotic regime that apparently does not get a lot of criticism here. I think the United States has got to sit down and say, look, Palestinians are entitled to basic human rights. Israel is absolutely entitled to exist in independence and freedom. Let's work that out. Trump, and I think that requires a level, an even-handed policy in the Middle East. And we don't have that now. I'll tell you what, James, frightens me very, very much. Going a little bit beyond Israel, we have been at war, and we sometimes forget that, in Afghanistan now for 17 years, in Iraq for 15 years. We have a president here who has allied himself with the despotic regime in Saudi Arabia, which is now at war in Yemen. And let me be very honest with you, I fear very much about perpetual warfare. I'm in an Orwellian situation where we're always at war. You got the military-industrial complex with huge power. The Congress, against my vote, voted to increase military spending by $165 billion. They're talking now about tactical nuclear weapons on submarines. So, you know, I think we have a lot to be concerned about. And I think we have to take a hard look at what our foreign policy is. What does the war on terrorism mean? Are we always going to be at war? Or is there an alternative approach? This is not easy stuff. I don't mean to suggest that it is, but I do worry about this country being engaged in perpetual warfare at great expense to the American people and to the world.
And there are stories this week about the national security team actively considering wading deeper into Yemen and getting more involved.
And not to mention the possibility of a war with Iran. You know, we're going to bring forth the Department of Defense authorization bills coming up. And I'm going to bring forth an amendment, which I doubt will get a vote. And this is my amendment. It will suggest that 0.1% of the defense budget go to student and cultural exchange programs around the world. 0.1% would be $700 million so that American kids could go abroad, that kids from around the world can come into our classrooms. that people in the world can get to know each other rather than continue what Trump's effort is to try to divide us up and teach us hatred. So 0.1%. Let's see if we can get a vote on that.
What's interesting is when President Trump ran in 2016, he actually got a lot of applause in some of the places for talking about ending perpetual war. He said,
exactly.
We're going to bring the troops home from Afghanistan. What happened? Is it just the
well? It happens. It's what always happens with Trump. He lies all of the time, and he lied to the American people. Your point is right. You know, I often point out, as all of you remember, that Trump said, "I will provide health care to everybody, cheaper, better." Well, then he ended up supporting a legislation to throw 32 million people off of health care. I will bring about tax reform, but it will not benefit the wealthy. Well, 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%. And then he talked about regime change, criticized Clinton because she supported the war in Iraq, not Donald Trump. But then, you know, he brings John Bolton on, who in fact was one of the architects of the war in Iraq. So, I mean, I think you have a president who doesn't, and I say this not happily, not in a partisan way. I don't think he knows too much about policy. I don't think he's particularly interested in policy. I think he often responds to the last person who got his ear. But I worry very much about the aggressiveness to try to, you know, obviously undermine not only the Paris climate change accord, but also the Iranian nuclear deal. And all of this tells me that, you know, this guy may be into perpetual warfare or maybe even worse, a war with Iran.